Hey there, my name's Curtis Lucas and you're watching Empire Building. So in this video I'm going to be sharing with you a video of an interview that took place at Microstrategy World, the Bitcoin conference that Michael Saylor and Microstrategy put on for 6,917 companies that attended this virtual conference. Michael Saylor decided to do this in order to educate other institutions that are thinking about getting into Bitcoin but may not be fully aware or educated on the process and some of the legal considerations that these institutions and or companies might be faced with when trying to execute this kind of strategy. I find that paying very close attention to this type of event can give you incredible insights into exactly what the mindset is of these investors. Why does it even matter what they do? I, for one, believe that the narrative of institutional investment is the key driving force during this bull run. And I also find that it never really hurts to pay very close attention to other successful people when they speak. I'm not saying that they have all the answers, but they certainly have made enough mistakes. And with those mistakes come wisdom. They did not get wealthy by accident. So listen to them. In this interview, Michael Saylor is interviewing Ross Stevens of Stone Ridge Holdings. Stone Ridge spun off NYDIGS, which is New York Digital Investment Group. If you're wondering if that sounds a little bit familiar, NYDIGS is the firm that Mara used when it executed its $150 million purchase of Bitcoin on the open market just a couple of weeks ago. They are one of the go-to firms in the institutional investment space when institutions are looking to diversify their own portfolios and enter the Bitcoin space. One of the biggest problems that Bitcoin poses for institutional investors is custody. You can't just give the private keys to the CEO or the CFO and expect them to just behave themselves. So for institutions, it's very important for their shareholders and for just good governance that their Bitcoin be held by a trusted third party, one that has done their due diligence and abides by all the regulations set forth by all the regulatory bodies. This kind of financial infrastructure did not exist the last time Bitcoin went through its bull cycle. It was nearly impossible for most institutions to get on board. This is why this time is truly very different than every previous bull cycle. We've got fresh players on the field, and they're extremely well trained. This interview went on for about an hour, but I definitely wanted to make sure that I cherry-picked the best parts of the video and then added my own comments and thoughts. So keeping in mind that this event was laser-focused on corporations and institutions, all of which have enormous amounts of capital and assets and cash, and they all face the same problem. This is what drove them to this event in the first place. So in the first part of this interview, they spend a good deal of time talking about what the problem is that these institutions and corporations are facing.
I guess the question is, what's Bitcoin got to do with any of this? And what's Bitcoin got to do with corporations?
I mean, a lot. I mean, in my view, kind of everything. I can start with the conclusion, and I'll work backwards.
Okay, I like that. Give me the answer.
Yeah, I'll give you the answer. The answer is Bitcoin is not volatile. That's the answer. And let me explain, okay? Learning Bitcoin is like, at least to me, it's like, for me, it was like learning a foreign language. You know, you live in Spain for a year or you live in France for a year, and at some point you get good enough. It takes some time, but with immersion, you think in Spanish, right? You think in French. Something clicks for you. You make that switch. You're no longer thinking, like, how do I say, where's the barber in Spanish, and doing that English to Spanish translation in your mind. You just think the question in Spanish. I now think in Bitcoin. Okay, it's taken me 8 years of morning study. You are much faster than me. You know, I'm a slow learner, but I get there. It's taken me 8 years of morning study and a lifetime of lessons studying the markets but I now think in Bitcoin, and it's very freeing. And through that lens of thinking in Bitcoin, Bitcoin is not volatile. Fiat is volatile. The price of college is volatile in fiat. Keeps getting cheaper in Bitcoin. The price of prime real estate is very volatile in fiat. Keeps getting cheaper in Bitcoin. The price of all of my long-dated denominated liabilities like a mortgage or retirement, or we do a lot of work with insurance companies, they're long-dated fiat-based liabilities, a death benefit for life insurance contracts or annuity payments. Those are extraordinarily volatile in fiat, and they each keep getting cheaper in Bitcoin.
So some of you may be new to this space, but you may find that already your eyes are becoming wide open. Are you thinking in Bitcoin already? You probably find that the more and more you get into this space, the more and more you dive into it, the more and more you realize how much your life is impacted by these external forces that not that long ago you didn't even know existed. I mean, what does the Fed balance sheet have to do with your life? And what exactly can you do about it anyways? When you start thinking in Bitcoin, the entire world looks completely different. The conversations you have with yourself in your mind on a day-to-day basis really start to change. The conversations you have with others start to change. And if you're not there yet, you will soon enough. Thinking in Bitcoin actually makes it a whole lot easier to sleep at night. All of these corporations and institutions are all facing the very real threat of having their money devalued. You can imagine that if you're sitting on, say, $1 billion or so, and you've just found out that that $1 billion is going to lose a large percentage of its purchasing power, then you've got a very serious problem. Where it used to be good governance to make sure that you have sort of a nest egg, something put away for a rainy day, just in case. Suddenly, this nest egg is a liability. As Michael Saylor puts it, it's more like holding a giant ice cube that's just constantly melting away. So they've been paying very close attention to what the central bank is doing and what it's saying.
It seems like Hayami, Powell, and Lagarde each felt they had no choice. What's this tell us about central bankers?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, the sequence of Hayami, Powell, and Lagarde, it makes me think of the great philosopher of modernity, Mike Tyson.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he was the best at philosophy. And his most famous phrase was, everyone has a plan till they get punched in the face. I love that one.
I think of it often.
I think of it often too, and I've been punched plenty of times. I mean, these bankers, they got punched in the face really hard, and they felt pain and they felt fear because they're human. You would have, and I would have also. They got scared. They retreated. I think, though, what it really tells us about the world is that these central bankers, as well-intentioned and as smart and as really good as they are, they're just up against forces far bigger than themselves. I think it tells us that the economic choice they'd like to make of short-term pain for a long-term gain, it's just out of scope for them. I think it tells us that their choice is short-term pain for economic catastrophe and certain political extinction. So they'll just keep printing. I mean, they're just going to keep printing. And that just makes corporate reserves, kind of the point of the conference, just riskier and more volatile. And what it really tells us, though, I think, is the system itself is the problem. The system is so over-levered, so dependent on free money that just a little huff and a little puff and the whole thing gets blown down. Can I tell you just one more story?
Okay.
Okay, so let's go back to Jerome, our guy, right? Last March, he's learned the lessons of Mike Tyson's wisdom. He doesn't want to wait to get punched in the face. And, the markets start to fall. Some people start to lose some money. And Powell's view, through his actions, not his words, through his actions, is that no level of pre-crisis irresponsibility, no level of overborrowing, irresponsible overborrowing, no level must be allowed to have consequences. The new Fed mandate is not price stability. It's not full employment. The new Fed mandate, again, through his actions, not his words, is let's decouple risk-taking from the consequences of risk-taking. The new Fed mandate is let's finally once and for all institutionalize moral hazard. So to foam the runway for this new mandate, what does he do? Jerome goes out and he starts buying securities at a scale the world has never seen or imagined was possible. He starts buying about a day's worth of US GDP, a day's work. So I want to put that in human terms. All the work, all 350 million of us do. We wake up in the morning, we get our kids to school, we go to work. All of the work of all of us. You know, I picture Jerome kind of getting to his desk, gets the keyboard out, and just like Control P click. All Americans, collective daily labor, he just prints. Now, as I said, I don't question central bankers are well-intentioned. I strongly believe they are. But humans are not supposed to have that kind of power over other humans. In the same way that a stock certificate is titled to company capital, money is titled to human time, Michael. I mean, people sacrifice their time for money, which enables us to trade our time for the time sacrifices of others. That's how it's supposed to work. So a tool that can command human time, the central bank keyboard, Control P, that keyboard steals time. And it steals time from some, particularly and most powerfully the non-asset owners, the most vulnerable, and it redistributes that time to others, most notably the existing asset owners. It adds rocket fuel to wealth inequality, and it leaves the fidelity of the signal content of prices just in tatters.
So if you're a high net worth individual or a wealthy corporation, this is a terrifying scenario, but not one they haven't witnessed before. Certainly no one's ever witnessed it on the scale that we saw during this past year. I can recall the narrative being at the time when the Fed started printing all this money that none of these corporations did anything wrong. Any risks or whatever that they might have been taking was based on the market information that they all had at the time. And no one could have predicted this pandemic. So when governments around the world started forcing these companies to close down, it would be completely unfair to then have them fail as a result of that forced shutdown. And when everyone got afraid that things were just going to come collapsing down, the Fed stepped in and propped that market up. Since then, the amount of dollars on the Fed balance sheet has nearly doubled in 1 year. This is unheard of, and they're not going to stop. But you can also understand that if they didn't do this, the consequences would be far-reaching and most likely would end their own careers. So it's been made pretty clear that they intend to continue doing this. So what are these corporations and institutions to do in order to protect the wealth that they've already built? They need to convert those dollars into assets. Many of them already own a large amount of assets. But the word is out that there's a new kid on the block, and he's the first draft pick, the star player, Bitcoin. Something they've never been able to acquire before due to the rules that they have to play by. But they can now. So now you understand the problem they face. In the next part of the interview, they start talking about the answer.
So then why is Bitcoin excellent money?
Well, I think that's for everybody to make up their own mind. I'll tell you how I think about it, though. There's really two primary dimensions that I think money should be evaluated on: sellability across time and sellability across space. So sellability across time just means, will a money keep its value through time, or will it depreciate? But, people talk about gold. What about silver versus gold? I mean, and the reality is gold has been far better and far more reliable. It's much better store of value than silver because it's scarcer and it's got a much lower supply growth. Gold grows at about 2% a year. Silver grows about 20-30% a year. So gold is a much better money than silver, but let's compare it to Bitcoin. I mean, gold still does grow. you print through mining, you print gold at about 2% a year, and Bitcoin's on an asymptotic journey to 0% inflation per year. So 2% a year, roughly times 50 years, and gold essentially depreciates completely versus Bitcoin. So Bitcoin will be worth far more than gold in the future once it clicks for people that gold is printed at a much higher rate, and that compounds, much higher, 1 or 2% a year, but that compounds over 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. But there's another property of gold that makes it weak relative to Bitcoin. And in fact, this is a property of Bitcoin that makes Bitcoin truly unique among any money in history, which is that Bitcoin is the first store of value ever in which its supply is entirely unaffected by its demand. If we take the example of gold to prove this point, if gold went to, I don't know, $100,000 an ounce, so up 50x overnight, you and I know what's going to happen tomorrow morning. The miners are going to get to work very early, right?
I'd be mining it.
You and I would drop the phone and start mining, right? We're going to start mining. We're going to look around our house for gold. We're going to melt it down. We're going to drive up the supply. We can't skyrocket the supply, but we're going to drive up the supply. We're going to drive down the price of gold. If during the course of this conversation, people really feel like bullish on Bitcoin and Bitcoin goes to 1 million, I'm saying that with a smile, what's going to happen to the supply of Bitcoin? Nothing. Nothing. That's incredible. Bitcoin is the first store of value in human history where its supply is never, can never, will never be affected by any amount of its increased demand. So the conclusion is that Bitcoin is better at being gold than gold because it's more sellable across time.
I don't know about you, but the first time I heard that part, kind of got the goosebumps. Bitcoin is the first engineered money. If an engineer was to design a money, it would look exactly like Bitcoin. But speaking as an engineer myself, when I look at Bitcoin, I see an engineered system. Better at being gold than gold. I certainly see the value in the long-standing track record that gold has. Bitcoin still has a very long way to go for it to mature into that class of an asset. But as we know, Bitcoin is so much more than just a new asset class. It truly is remarkable.
Now, the other characteristic about money that's really important is sellability across space. Like, can you move the money around the world efficiently? And this is another place where gold has a really acute flaw. It's just hard to transport. I mean, forget paper gold, because then you're back in sort of fiat land and all the problems of fiat. Gold is just hard to transport. And this is where fiat, for all its flaws, and fiat's DOA, but for all its flaws, fiat really shines here. You can move it around the world. And in a sort of an internet world where network power is everything, this ability to sell across space is critical. However, I want to clear up a pretty common misperception, which is that Bitcoin is slower than fiat. The reality is the opposite. Bitcoin moves much faster across space than fiat. The key, though, is to compare apples to apples. Final settlement. And in final settlement, there's no comparison. Bitcoin increases our capacity for final, for example, international settlement by 500,000 transactions a day and completes the settlement with finality in about an hour. In international settlement, you're talking 2, 3, 4, 5 days, 7 days. It can be a month. Depends on the two countries. And you may not get there. And even within a country like ours, Michael, don't confuse the speed of your Visa payment with its final settlement, because it's not finally settling. When you go to Starbucks and buy coffee with your Visa card, no final settlement occurs. What actually happens is your bank and Starbucks bank, they have some credit risk to each other for 2 or 3 days. Usually it's fine, but sometimes with disastrous results. And then there's final settlements. Bitcoin settles every hour, and it's a bearer instrument. It's the first ever electronic bearer instrument. So credit risk is not a concept. We said earlier that Bitcoin is better at being gold than gold. What we're saying now is Bitcoin is better at being fiat than fiat. It's more sellable across space. And because it's not debt like fiat, it has no credit risk. So the conclusion is that Bitcoin is the best money we have. Maybe it's the best money we've ever had. And that's why I've learned the language. That's why I now think in it.
I love these kinds of interviews. We have two extremely intellectual people with backgrounds in the traditional financial sector, and they are just in awe at this technology and what it's capable of. Bitcoin is the best money the human race has ever known, but that is not all it is. It is so much more than that. But it's yet to be seen if all of those possibilities become realized within our society. I'd like to think that it's inevitable, simply because the better technology, when the choice is given to the people, it will always win out. There's no puppet master behind the scenes pulling on the strings. This is free, open market. When you give a person the choice, they will take the option that is more efficient and lower cost every single time. So you can see, the more and more you think about this, the more and more you start to understand what it's like to think in Bitcoin. The former perception that you might have had of the risk of being exposed to this sector starts to melt away. You start to feel that risk when you're not in this sector. Everything else starts to seem risky because it's built on top of a system that's simply not sustainable. So the next part of this interview is my favorite part. It's where they actually get into what NYDIGS is actually doing to educate these new institutional investors, and also gives us a whole lot of insight into what these institutions are actually doing as we speak.
So the second part of my question is, what are you doing to help others see what you see?
Well, for a while we were trying, and nothing was actually happening. I recently learned how bamboo grows. It's pretty, to me, it's pretty fascinating. It spends its first 5 years building an extensive root system underground and basically doing nothing visible. And then it explodes 90 feet in the air in 6 weeks. That's bamboo. It's not a terrible analogy to NYDIG, Stone Ridge's Bitcoin subsidiary. You know, we started in 2017. We put a great team together. We had a bunch of capital. We worked and worked and worked. You know, we laid our root system. We operated we operated in stealth. It's true that we operated in stealth, but it's almost as if it didn't matter that we operated in stealth because no institutions really cared, and it wasn't for lack of trying. We knocked on a lot of doors. We were just too early. We were just too early. But, you know, we kept at our craft. We built our root system. We thickened and strengthened the roots. And we worked quietly, you know, out of view, which is our style. The firm, you know, has had a no press policy since its inception in 2012. But if you fast forward to today, NYDIG is a full service, vertically integrated, Bitcoin only financial services firm. The first billion during that dark, challenging 5 years, it took 1,200 days to raise that first billion.
First billion's always the hardest.
First billion's always the hardest, 1,200 days. The last billion took 6.
6 what?
A year ago, we had 25 institutional clients. Today, we have 280 institutional clients. We've got a pipeline in the onboarding process of 96. We can put 75 institutions through the pipe a month. That's our current capacity. We've got over $6 billion in Bitcoin now between what's in the door and what's committed from institutions. And we are vanguardizing this asset class. Best product, best price. And as we scale, we're driving prices down, down, down. Our pricing today is 70% lower than it was a year ago. And by the end of the year, Michael, I am confident we'll have over $25 billion of Bitcoin. I've just got this order book. I'm not guessing. I see what's happening.
Okay, $25 billion. Yeah, that's astonishing growth, and it matches what I suspected, but I didn't know is going on with institutions and Bitcoin.
$25 billion. Now, I know we all realize that's a lot of money, but like the man said at the beginning of the interview, we need to think in Bitcoin. So what is $25 billion? Well, that's 657,895 Bitcoin. Well, that sounds like an awful lot of Bitcoin. Let's think about that in terms of Bitcoin mining. The only way in which new, fresh Bitcoin can be added to the overall supply. During this halving cycle, the maximum amount of Bitcoin that can be produced every single day is 900. In a year, that's 328,500 Bitcoin. So it would take nearly exactly 2 years to mine $25 billion worth of fresh minted Bitcoin. And we're not talking about from individual miners, we're talking about all of it. Now, mind you, over the course of this next 2 years, no doubt the price of Bitcoin will rise, so they'll be able to fill that order book without needing to acquire that many Bitcoin. I only highlight this to point out that the institutional players alone have an insatiable appetite for Bitcoin, far more than the miners can produce. And as we've seen, the miners aren't selling, well, unless you're in the F2 pool. But the publicly traded Bitcoin miners are not emptying their balance sheets. They need that Bitcoin. They need as much of it as they can possibly hold on to. My opinion is that the selling that we've witnessed from the F2 mining pool were mostly from private Bitcoin miners. Miners who don't have access to public capital. They can't just raise more money. If they want more Bitcoin machines, they have to sell their Bitcoin. But for me, that's just a theory. The point here is this is how the institutional investors are thinking. And this is the scale at which they're trying to enter this space. Keep in mind, he's only talking about his own customers. He's not the only show in town. There are other institutional firms also competing in this space to provide this service. These institutions are going to be running through this market, sucking up all of this Bitcoin and locking it down. They're not here to trade it. For them, it's an escape from this liability that they currently hold on their balance sheets. Cash. If they sell their Bitcoin, they just got back their liability. This is very important to understand because the phenomenon that we're witnessing is not just going to last for a couple of months. This is going to take years to play out. So anyone that was thinking that that was the entire bull run and it was over in just a couple of months severely underestimates exactly what is happening in our economy today. Which brings me to the next part of the interview.
And when you think about trends in anything, you're a tech guy, all you got to do is follow the brains. Even more than the money, the brains know first. Where are some of the smartest people in the world shifting their careers to focus? Where are some of the best developers in the world going? They're going to Bitcoin. And I'd never underestimate the power of a mass movement of developers. And don't underestimate the ferocity of the emerging decentralized class, us Bitcoiners. I mean, just like early encounters with the printing press and antibiotics and aqueducts and the internet itself, they were incalculably underestimated. People incalculably underestimate Bitcoin.
Follow the brains. Throughout history, if you had held to that practice, I can't think of a single instance where you would have been proven wrong. The people who are educated in emerging technologies always have a leg up on the rest of the population. So when you see the smartest and all the brightest people flocking towards this new shiny thing, you might want to take notice. Odds are they see something there, something of value. The internet was pretty clunky and awkward and, let's face it, geeky when it first came out. Only geeks used it. It served no purpose for anyone else, but they saw something that no one else could see at the time. Never underestimate the nerds. I thought this was a fascinating and extremely well done interview, and I think it helps to understand where these institutional investors are coming from. Because in effect, what they are doing is they're helping Bitcoin form a new and much stronger foundation than it's ever had before. I know there's a lot of talk about hodling among Bitcoiners, but honestly, there are a lot of active traders in the market as it stands right now. For every Bitcoin out there, there's probably a price someone is willing to sell it for. And as the price rises, the number of Bitcoin that will become available will increase. But as time goes on, whomever buys that Bitcoin has little incentive to turn around and sell it again. And if that buyer is an institution who has no plans for this money, and they just went through a whole lot of legal proceedings just to be able to acquire that Bitcoin, they're going to need a pretty darn good reason for getting rid of it. And this is a phenomenon that the Bitcoin ecosystem has never really had going for it until now. From a technical point of view, the Bitcoin price is setting up beautifully. And personally, I suspect we'll be seeing new all-time highs very soon. Certainly before the end of this month. Possibly within the next week. But while all that is exciting, the point of this video was to get you into the mindset of the long-term investor. They're here, and they got a lot of Bitcoin they still need to scoop up, but it's gonna take them time. I thought a video like this would certainly help ease any anxieties you might be feeling about what the price might do over the next couple of weeks. Let all that go. It's not gonna matter, especially not 6 to 8 months from now or 6 to 8 years from now. Start thinking in Bitcoin. You'll feel a whole lot better. I know I do. That's it for this one. Now let's get back to empire building. Bye.